Welcome to the Relationship Diversity Podcast, where we celebrate, question, and explore all aspects of relationship structure diversity, from soloamory to monogamy to polyamory and everything in between, because every relationship is as unique as you are. We'll bust through societal programming to break open and dissect everything we thought we knew about relationships, to ask the challenging but transformational questions: who am I, and what do I really want in my relationships? I'm your guide, Carrie Jaroslaw, best-selling author, speaker, intuitive, and coach. Join me as we reimagine all that our most intimate relationships can become. Today's episode is part of our Conversation series. I'm just one voice in this relationship diversity movement, and it's important to bring more unique perspectives into the conversation. Today, I'll be talking with Andrea Atherton about questioning all we've been taught about love, to be a love anarchist. By going into this inquiry, we begin the process of healing our wounds and defining what love means to us from this healed perspective. A little about Andrea. Andrea facilitates transformation that enables people to heal from the past so that they're free to create their most authentic lives and relationships. Andrea has over 26 years of working as an art therapist, addictions counselor, yoga instructor, intuitive, and Reiki master. She's funneled her experience of working with thousands of clients into mindset love. She's the host of Love Anarchy podcast that's dedicated to transcending the limited ideals we've been taught about love and relationships, and then explores all facets of love from an inclusive, progressive, and spiritual lens. Let's get into the conversation. Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for being a part of the Relationship Diversity podcast. I'm so excited that you're here.
This is my first, so I am a podcast host, but this is my first time being a guest.
What? I love that. Well, that's how we met. So I was a guest on your podcast, which is called Love Anarchy podcast, which I absolutely love that name because it's, to me, it says like throwing away everything that you thought you knew to figure out what you want. And so I wanted to start there as to like, what made you start that? Where did the name come from? And what do you talk about on your podcast?
Well, Love Anarchy, I remember having the concept, which I'll talk about, but the name, I had a production company help me with it. And I sent Love Anarchy out to my friends, and I had more like metaphysical names and like manifesting love and things like that, and I got so much yes, I love it, or no, that reminds me of the political climate we're in with the anarchy and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm getting reaction. So either it goes one way or another, but people strike up conversation about it. So you're right. The anarchy piece of Love Anarchy is breaking apart all the things we've been taught and being able to open up different facets of what love and what relationships are. So people can pick and choose what works for them.
And what inspired you to do that? And how are you, I guess, experiencing that? I mean, I got to know you a little bit, and I know that you're really dedicated to your own inner work. And so I'm curious what your journey was from, to getting to that kind of thing, that's something that you want to talk about on your podcast.
Well, I've been here a little bit on this earth, so many things have happened, but I'll kind of give the key points of it. I was raised Catholic, so in New York, so Irish Catholic, and I remember being in church and having so little role models for being a female. Even when I was little, and this is really interesting, and I just put this together, I used to pretend to be deaf, and I knew a little sign language, so I used to practice my sign language while I was in church because I felt like they were never talking to me.
Ah, wow.
I never felt loved and church.
Wow.
Years later, I went through a very mystical experience. One of my really cool catechism teachers taught us how to meditate. So the first meditation, I drop into this deep state where Jesus was over me, had his hands in my chest around my heart, and Mary was behind him with his hands on the shoulder. And I just leaked. Okay, I'm 13. And they turn the lights on, and they're like, share your experience. And I was like thinking, no way. I'm just kind of wiping the tears and the snot away. And I mean, that was my first experience of any spiritual kind of feeling of love.
Mm.
And over the years, when I really go into deep meditation, have real metaphysical experiences, my heart opens and my tears just stream down. So that was the first time.
Wow.
So I always felt like I was pushing against the Catholic Church. So then later on, I felt like I became atheist and became very school oriented. I was in college and learning very mind-based masculine energy. Then a few years later, went to grad school to become an art therapist, and I was studying Jung, archetypes, and things like that. My thesis was about dream work, dream work, doing art, and meditation. And they started looping into one another, and it just kind of, the spiral like just sent me forward into my spiritual journey, even though I was probably on it my whole life.
Right.
I felt like it really got some grounding. And during that time I was in grad school, spirituality came into the practice of psychotherapy. So the director of the program, I was a graduate assistant, and she was writing spiritual art therapy. So that was my beginning of what love and what wasn't, because in my thesis, I looked like at my childhood about my beliefs and the very strong intuitive feeling. I'm like, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. But feeling like I couldn't talk about it. So I think many years later, now I'm talking about it and I'm finding other people to talk with about it. In these facets, and coming from a more spiritual place and a more intuitive and a healthier place of love and not fear.
Yeah. So that leads me to my next question, which is when you're realizing all that love isn't, right? And this is the journey, the soul journey of picking apart all that isn't without maybe understanding what is. So what did you find out through your journey that love is? What spoke to your heart about what love is?
I love that, because that's exactly where, I was like, after my divorce 16 years ago, I think was the final turning point. And I'm like, this is not love. I'm like, this
What
is
was
not
that first
love.
relationship like?
What's that?
What was that first relationship like?
It was, we were next door neighbors. I was in grad school, and, we were both New Yorkers, and we moved out to Colorado together. And I think we were really good friends, but we were so like, I was in grad school, and then he came out and he went to school. And things really fell apart once we had a child, like 8 years later, no, like 4 years later. And it fell apart because we had to work together. We were really independent, and he was in school, and then I was in school. And I just think we just were at that point, and I felt like I didn't know him more than, like, I feel like I know you more than I knew him in a way. And it just like all this realization came crashing down. And I feel like, too, in hindsight, I was pushed in the relationship a little. I was, when we got married, I was 31. I wanted to have a child. And I was like, well, do I do that? So I got a beautiful child out of it. And, she's in college now, and I don't regret it at all. And I really feel like all these, what isn't love, really has shown me or allowed me to experience what love is.
And so how would you explain that? How would you describe what love is from your perspective?
From my perspective, I'm I really, after all these years, it comes from a place of source, what we want to say,
Mm.
God, goddess, and being in line with that, and then living authentically and loving yourself first.
Mm.
And then rather than, like I said, chasing after something, having things attracted to you. Law
Right,
of attraction.
from that self-love, loving yourself first. And that's a huge message of mine through the podcast is
Mhm.
that, how much we look outside of ourselves to tell us that we're worthy of love when that love comes from within us. So when you got to that point in your relationship where you realized, oh, it's, I'm going to look at loving myself um letting that extend out. What happened in your relationships after that?
Oh my gosh. Well, people who would cross my boundaries a lot or weren't that felt like a lot of work kind of dropped away.
Hmm.
Because as I loved myself, I created more boundaries, and then people are like, oh, no, she keeps saying no to me, or she keeps, and I don't like that. So just energetically, people like that. And my circle of friends, which I've always had great circles of friends, just became healthier and more equal give and take.
Hmm.
Um, and like my focus on love became more about, it's like overall loving my clients, loving my relatives, and it doesn't mean always spending time with them, but sending that loving energy and literally just attracting and just allowing the kind of the lower vibration, the more challenging relationships to go. And I'm not saying that all my relationships are perfect, and I'm not perfect in them myself, but I just notice, and even on a day where I change and I'm maybe lower vibration, all of a sudden all these challenging people show up, or I perceive that these challenging people, and it's a thermostat that I'm like, oh, I have to get back in myself and figure out what's going on in there.
Yeah, I love that you say that about when you're, aligned and you're feeling self-love, that your kind of friend tribe and the people around you just fell away that weren't in alignment with that. Because I try to explain that a lot of times to clients or to people that come in and they're kind of at the beginning of their journey and they're really starting to look at who they are and they have a lot of toxicity around them. And that, when I talk to them about let's go into looking at yourself, go into the intimacy that you have with yourself, it's a little hard to grasp at the beginning of the journey that that's really the foundation of the relationships that are around you and that you attract to you. So I love that you said that.
And the closer we are in relationship, and then I have clients who come in who are having problems with people who are really close, and they're like, he did this and she did
Mm-hmm.
this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm. We're here to talk about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I remember one client come in very, very together, beautiful energy person. And she's like, I need to choose between this guy and this guy, and you need to help me. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with them and all to do
Mm.
with you. And I remember the look on her face, her jaw just dropped and said, what?
Yeah. It's a tough pill to swallow when you first start. You're like, because I don't think we're taught that to take that kind of radical responsibility, right? It's just easier to blame the other person. I'm upset in my world because of you instead of, oh, wait, that comes from me. Oh, dang it. I got to look at myself, So that's what I think coaches like you and me, where we can kind of hold that mirror and reflect back to them that's, where to start. But I guess the next question is about your current relationship structure. You're in relationship, right? This is what we talked about a little bit on our own. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you're in?
yeah. I'm in a newer relationship right now. I was single for a little while. I go through um since my divorce, kind of like taking periods of time off and kind of engrossing myself in what I needed to learn, maybe about the last person I was dating. But yeah, I'm in a relationship now that I really um, wrote in my manifestation book, and I said, this is exactly what I want. And then I opened it up. I'm like, there we go. It's like got
Wow. And
everything on there.
okay, so what would you say was the biggest thing you needed to clear to bring that relationship that is like your dream relationship into your life? So you say you always do that kind of self-reflection after relationships, and I do as well, or did as well. And what was the biggest thing that you thought you needed to learn from your
Oh,
last
this
relationship?
is probably, I mean, it's something that kept coming up and I kept going through layers. But in the childhood that I grew up in, it was very confusing because I was the adult and everybody else acted like children. But yeah, I wasn't allowed to have feelings. And I
Mm.
was always too big or had too many, asked for too much.
Ah.
So that was a big theme that ran through. So then it came down to my lovability
Mm.
and my deserving of love.
Mm.
And also, I remember my mother always saying, I love you more than anybody else. And that's really what this is probably the main thing why I went the love journey, is because I was so confused. I'm like, this feels horrible. So
Huh.
if somebody ever said they love me, I'm like, oh, like love is death.
Oh,
So
that's
those
so
are things.
interesting. So wait, are you saying that your relationship with your mother, she told you that she loved you more than anything, but she wasn't really she wasn't acting that way to you?
Like I said, I'm not her therapist.
Right.
Very lot of narcissistic qualities, alcoholic. So very inconsistent. And it was always about her and how
Mm.
I was a reflection. And I could never be too pretty, too smart,
Yeah.
or too anything to outshine her.
Mm.
So
And then
if
that gets,
like
I was going to say that gets so confusing. Then when she says, I love you more than anything in the world, but her actions are
exactly.
totally different, it's very confusing what love really is.
Yeah,
Wow.
so wow, that goes back to that. It's been my whole life of
Mm-hmm.
like this isn't in my search. I love to think and I love to go deep and I love to observe people, and that's why I love the podcast is amazing. I get to talk to people all over the world and get their nuggets
Mm-hmm.
about what it is. But I believe, like at the end of my podcast, I say love is the only true power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like shifting all these beliefs about love because I knew they weren't true, but they were very intact in my subconscious.
Absolutely. So, okay, so let's say there's someone, in some small town who has the very same experience, who has parents who are abusive, but tell them that they love them. And so it's very confusing. How did you start picking apart that and recoding into your subconscious a new way of looking at love?
Oh my gosh. I've been in the past psychotherapist for 26 years. So I dove right in, art therapy and then yoga philosophy, studied shamatha, Buddhist meditation. I studied feeding your demons and a lot connected with the archetype work of Jung. I've like everything that I could possibly find surrounding myself. I love books about love.
Mm-hmm.
Deepak Chopra and Ruiz, and any spiritual book that I could ever get my hands on, and of course, any deeply spiritual book was all about love. So I
Mm-hmm.
felt very comforted by that, and slowly just picked apart the layers of the onion and healed. And as a psychotherapist, we are all in therapy too. So I got to
Yeah.
study a variety, be in a variety of therapies as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just did this episode about the healing journey is a process, and it's not this just like magical final, destination, like finish line that you're getting to. And I think that's what I get from what you're saying. And I have been my experience too, is that it is a process. It is about learning a lot and questioning yourself and, trying new shoes of love, like high heels and, wedge shoes for like an analogy, but just trying on different feelings of love and doing that soul searching, but the basis of it is finding self-love, self acceptance and acknowledgement.
And it's funny because we can do so much work on our own. And, and I feel like the past couple of years, COVID really sent me into like deep spiritual healing, connecting with guides. My intuition deepened, and I was kind of on this wave. And then getting into a relationship after not being in one for a while, it's like, I'm like, I was more prepared. I'm like, stuff is still going to come up. But that's
Mm-hmm.
what relationships are for.
Ah, agree. 100%. Yes, agree. I do think
And
the same thing. Relationships are for that reflection to go deeper into our own healing.
we are, and they're about healing. It's not about being happy all the time or avoiding, but it's also necessary that you have some self awareness about your triggers or
Mm.
about what's going on inside of you because it's so easy to blame,
Mm-hmm.
especially your significant other.
Yes, yes. And so you were on your own for a while and now you're in this relationship. And I'm curious because in the podcast, we talk a lot about designing your relationship. So knowing yourself well enough to know that even if you label yourself as monogamous or, which we have talked about that that's the structure that feel that you're in, how
Mhm.
you do it uniquely you. Like Andrea is uniquely you, and how your partner is uniquely them, and how you come together and create this unique relationship. So, is there any way that you can talk about of how you've designed your relationship?
Well, I got really clear on my needs and wants
Mm-hmm.
and what were my non-negotiables
Mm.
and loved myself through it and didn't like get angry, like get in relationship with somebody and get angry they weren't those things. I wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't live in the fantasy land. I met people and I was always respectful, but I knew it's just like, especially as I've grown and I become this very unique kind of person that not everybody's going to fit into it. Not every friend, not every
Mm-hmm.
coworker. And just honoring that and enjoying meeting people and learning about myself as I met people, as I dated, as I didn't date, and as people kind of came and went in my life. But when I really just loved myself, I ran into, I had a date with this guy and he like so different than
Yeah.
any other experience I ever had. Like he picked, like we met and we were going up to the mountains on a picnic and he was all dressed up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in like Chacos. I'm like going, hiking. I didn't have any makeup on. So I'm like, kind of like, I'm like, oh, you look nice. He's like, well, I wanted to present myself. And then when we get up there, I'll change. But I wanted to, give my first he packed a whole lunch, brought a bunch of different like waters and things like that, just in case, I wanted to, and, like the different choices. And he was just so kind of the interesting part is we sat by the river. We didn't look at each other, but kind of energetically next to one another and talked.
Hmm.
And that was really interesting because later I found out he's like, I wanted to get to know you without like objectifying you, like
Huh.
without, and I'm like, how I that was such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And so and so you guys, how long have you all been going out?
Just 3 months.
3 months. And so,
Very
as
new.
you're talking about, you're coming together with both of your relationship experiences, right? You're coming into this new relationship, you with all this awareness, right? And him, it sounds like he is able to meet you there. And so, I'm curious if you've had challenges and how you approach them, how this relationship is different than maybe other relationships, how you approach those challenges.
I just come from a place of love, but I talk about everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like if something's bothering me. I don't Resentment is the number one killer of love. And a
Yeah.
lot of times I find like clients at the beginning of a relationship, they're like, oh, I'm not going to say that, or I'm going to wait to that. And actually, there's a book I read a long time ago, and I can't remember the author, but it's called Truth in Dating.
Mm.
And it's pretty amazing and it inspired me, but it sounds like really hard. How do you tell somebody on a first date that they have bad breath or that,
Yeah.
I'm like, but they're like this radical and I just loved it because it's
Wow.
like that is honoring myself and that's self-love. But I can also, instead of a place of defensiveness, I can just say, hey, when you did this, I felt like this.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that
he at first, he got a little overwhelmed. He's like, he goes, I wanted to manifest a healthy woman who was active, who ate well, who communicated. I'm like, oh, like,
that's
and he's like, and then we were on a walk one day and he's like, this is what I wanted. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And he said something last night too, because I told him on the phone, I'm like, I appreciate this and that. And you're such an awesome person, when, you're thoughtful or like he stopped later because I made Thanksgiving dinner and he's like, if I didn't tell you, I wanted to tell you what a great job you did and you were a superwoman that
mm.
and that's such an awesome thing and I make sure that I'm pointing out the positive stuff too. I mean, and it's very easy at the beginning of a relationship too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, as the relationship grows, you learn more about each other. But I love that you have all of the awarenesses, of your self responsibility and your triggers, and then communication. Like, communication is really, there's a healthy communication and an unhealthy communication, right? I'm guilty of both. I sometimes can be really clear and loving and supportive with my communication with my partners, and sometimes not, but always working on it. How do you feel like you've grown? Or like, what's the correlation of your ability to communicate with the knowledge of who you are? Like, I feel like there's a correlation between those two. The more we know ourselves, the more we're able to communicate from, I guess, a respectful, loving way because we're just really clear with who we are. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, but with a caveat here, even this past weekend, I was driving my daughter home from college. She reminded me of her dad, how she was
Mm,
treating me. I got triggered, and then I went over to my boyfriend's house after,
right.
and I was like, I'm like, who? He's like, who are you? I'm like, who am I? And I'm like, you know what? Give me a little grace. I'm going to go take a little time out. I'm going to take a little drive. I'm going to go pick some stuff up. But I was aware that it was my trigger. And I was aware that, how I was, somatically feeling my heart beating, my chest clenched and the fear that I was feeling, I'm in tune with myself and where it comes from.
Mm, I
And
think
it
that is the
just, and
key.
and no, what I think is the key too is being honest about it instead of trying to shove it back down. And I said, my daughter and I had a conversation. I got triggered. I'm really not clear on it. I'm kind of still triggered right now. So just lend me a little grace. And if I'm a little more quiet or I'm a little more crabby or short or something, and being aware of my triggers and how I react with them too. It probably wasn't a great idea. I probably should have just gone home. But I didn't realize how triggered I was because it happened so fast, and that's going to happen
Yeah.
to us sometimes.
Yes.
So, and so the two things, like I know trust and communication, but the thing that has freed me so much is like, I'm sorry I was wrong.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And that's so hard to do sometimes.
But can
It
I
is.
tell you, every time I do it, I feel so free.
Yes. Yeah, because it almost it like releases that resistance of and that feeling that I have to defend myself or that the other person has to defend themselves.
Well,
You
and
know,
then we make them the enemy,
right.
which because of our vulnerability and our fears about admitting we're wrong, and that causes a lot of obstacles in relationships.
Yeah. And I want to go back to what you said about honesty. You know, it's so true. Honesty in relationships instead of playing games. right? And I think those games that I hear people play during dating or relationships. Should I do this? Should I show my vulnerability? That all comes from woundedness. But you just saying, like, I've been triggered. This is not about you. I need to figure this out, but just if you can give me some grace. It's just such a beautiful way to express the what's going on with you, even if you don't exactly know what's going on. You have that somatic response right in your body that something's happened. And that the awareness that, okay, this is not about you, but I need to figure this out. And then being willing to ask for that in a direct, honest way, like that's really powerful.
And talk about being real. I was not my normal, fun loving, lighthearted self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was palpable. And that's kind of like and when I'm real too, I'm not going to cover it up.
Yeah, and I think that that's reality in relationships because I'm now going on 17 years with my husband, and it's just there are chapters and seasons of life, and there are
Ups
times when
and downs.
totally
Yes.
there are times when things are just really challenging, and I love that idea of just being honest and saying, speaking from your heart about what's going on with you instead of making the other person wrong. I think that that can lead to more connection instead of disconnection.
Those are the two things. It's just like apologizing and just knowing or not knowing and just voicing that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
triggered. I have no idea why. And
Mm,
not being embarrassed and trying to shove it down and pretend because the energy is still there. You've had this experience before when your significant other's like, I'm fine
mm.
or nothing's wrong. And you can just, especially women, we can just feel it. We
Yes.
just know when something's amiss, especially us intuitive women. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like maddening sometimes because I'm like, are you mad at me? No, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And and he said, Tyler said, my boyfriend, he's like, I could feel, he's obviously an empath intuitive too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I could feel, I said, I'm angry and I'm deeply sad. And he's like, yeah, I feel all of it, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, so if we think we're fooling other people, we're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're also not fooling ourselves. We're keeping ourselves stuck in this loop of unfulfilled relationships. And I feel like that honesty that you talk about, being aware of yourself, being aware of your triggers, meeting your partner in that space, those are all parts of love, of loving yourself. And when you love yourself, you can love another person and come and meet in that space of respect and care, you know. So
And
that's
that goes back to accepting our own wounds
yeah.
and knowing our own wounds, knowing and feeling them.
Mhm.
Because when we don't give ourselves a chance to process, because a lot of our emotions and trauma are stored in our bodies,
Mhm.
and we are taught, and again, not in a great way. Like I can speak for myself. I'm not supposed to have feelings, or I'm only supposed to
Mm.
feel or emote how it's comfortable for all the adults around me. That took a
Mm.
long time to unlearn because then I had parts of myself, that I pushed aside, my inner child, and other emotive, creative parts of me that I
Yeah.
had to reintegrate.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we create our relationships from those wounds, and you see why relationships don't last. And I just love that you did your inner work and you continue to do it, but that you've seen that inner work that you've done has brought you this partner, which is exactly what you visioned, wrote down, and called into your life. And that's just so beautiful.
There's another part of it too, in working with clients who, get very deep into their spiritual studies and practice. And then they're like, why am I still hurt? Or why am I still angry? And I'm like, oh, because you're human and we can't spiritually bypass. Because if we are being spiritual in order to not be a human, that never works.
Oh, you can get me talking for about an hour on that subject. Yes, 100%. And, it's just it's that mentality of I should always be positive. I should always be, happy. And I'm just the spirit, that I'm mainly a spirit, but I'm not a physical body. That is true. We are physical bodies. That is part of who we are. And so there is like this pendulum swing from I'm just a body to I'm just a spirit. And we are all things. We're body, mind, spirit, right? So I love that, Andrea. And it's important for us to, especially those on a spiritual path, to fall in love with our humanness, to fall in love with our humanness and our spirit and all the aspects of ourselves, because as we love ourselves, then we attract those that can love us, and we can love more deeply as well.
And it's difficult when in your childhood, some of these parts of yourself were shamed or caused you to feel ambivalent about them too. But going back to your uniqueness point of view, that our relationships are unique and that we are unique, those are the unique parts and human parts of ourselves. And we need to embrace those parts, especially if they weren't as children. Then that's up to us as a parenting ourselves.
Yeah, that inner child work, right? Where we love the inner child and all aspects of ourselves. That is so powerful. I love that. Gosh. And so let's talk about quickly where people can find you, because and where people can find your podcast. Again, it's the Love Anarchy podcast.
Yep, it's the Love Anarchy podcast. If you just search that, a lot of different places will come up. I have a Buzzsprout page on Buzzsprout, and then I have a Facebook page, so you can find me on Facebook as well. You can find me on Andrea Atherton coaching too, and Andrea Atherton on Instagram as well. I'll be launching actually this big launch, my transition from being a psychotherapist and holistic counselor into my coaching mindset, Love, it's called. So I'll be launching that in January. So, yep. So,
I love that. We'll link your website and your podcast in the show notes. Absolutely. So people can get to it super easily. And go listen to this podcast, because it brings in a lot of really great questioning. And I've heard some of them. There's some great tips and coaching that you do in that podcast. And then you have great guests on there as well.
Well, like you were, Carrie, one of my favorite guests, because Carrie and I are so much alike. Yes. It's like we could go on and on and on.
We could. And, I hope all of this has been helpful for those of you who are sitting, at home and wondering how you start this kind of inquiry into self. And is it even worth it? I think Andrea and I are saying, yes, it is actually not. It's not just worth it. It's foundational. If you really want to change your outside experience, you have to do that inner work. And, I think everyone who does it gets to the point where they're like, okay, I've had enough. I've had enough horrible experiences. I've got to figure this out. That's how I changed everything in my love relationships. And
determination. Yes. Yeah. When you're done creating the same pattern.
Right. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming in, and everyone go listen to that podcast and go seek Andrea out. Thank you,
Carrie,
Andrea, for being here.
Thank you so much. And, it's been a pleasure being on.
Thank you for listening to the Relationship Diversity Podcast. Want to learn more about relationship diversity? I've got a free guide I'd love to send you. Go to www.relationshipdiversitypodcast.com to get yours sent right to you. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast. You being here and participating in the conversation about relationship diversity is what helps us create a space of inclusivity and acceptance together. The more comfortable and normal it is to acknowledge the vast and varied relating we all do, the faster we'll shift to a paradigm of conscious, intentional, and diverse relationships. New episodes are released every Tuesday and Thursday. Stay connected with me through my website, carriejaroslow.com, Instagram, and TikTok. Stay curious. Every relationship is as unique as you are. Are you wondering why you never seem to find lasting fulfillment in your relationships? Or do you create the same kinds of relationship experiences over and over again? Can you never seem to find even one person who you want to explore a relationship with? Have you just given up hope altogether? If this sounds like you, my recent book, Why Do They Always Break Up With Me, is the perfect place to start. The foundation of any relationship, whether intimate or not, is the relationship we have with ourselves. In the book, I lead you through 8 clear steps to start or continue your self-exploration journey. You'll learn about the importance of self-acceptance, gratitude, belief shifting, and forgiveness, and given exercises to experience these life-changing concepts. This is the process I use to shift my relationships from continual heartbreak to what they are now, fulfilling, soul-nourishing, compassionate, and loving. It is possible for you. This book can set you on a path to get there. Currently available through Amazon or through the link in the show notes.